Hello and welcome to the first video in our Tips for Teachers series, What is ABA? This lesson will begin by identifying what we mean when we talk about Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA. This is followed by an explanation of how behavior analysts define behavior. Finally, examples of public versus private behaviors are discussed. Throughout the presentation, you will be asked to answer questions related to the material that has been presented. Please answer these questions to the best of your ability. Let's begin now. Applied behavior analysis is the science of behavior. As with other sciences, such as chemistry and physics, researchers in ABA have found that behaviors follow certain laws, certain predictable patterns. Through countless experiments, behavior analysts have shown that an organism's behavior can be predicted and controlled based on certain environmental variables. But instead of using a microscope or a thermometer or other instrumentation to determine these environmental variables, behavior analysts use data gathered through systematic observations. By applying some of these evidence-based strategies that have been developed over decades of research, teachers can have the same influence on the behavior of their students. But before we can attempt to make these changes in behavior, we need to know, what is behavior? Simply put, behavior is everything that an organism does. Behaviors are verbs. This includes things like talking, walking, writing, sleeping, and so many other things. Since behavior is what an organism does, behavior would not include mental states such as anxiety, laziness, anger, or the like. In order for something to be a behavior, an organism would have to be able to do it. Think about that. How would a person anger? If a person is angry, we might see them yelling or throwing objects. But each of these is a separate behavior. Behaviors can suggest a person's mental state, but the mental state is not the behavior. I could say, that person is yelling, but it wouldn't make sense to say, that person is angrying. In order to determine if something is actually a behavior, we can subject it to the dead man's test. The dead man's test goes like this. If a dead man can do it, it isn't a behavior. For example, can a dead man lay in a bed? Yes, a dead man can lay in a bed, so laying in bed is not a behavior. What about sleeping? Can a dead man sleep? No, a dead man doesn't sleep, so sleeping is a behavior. Think about these classroom examples. Can a dead man raise his hand? No, a dead man can't raise his hand, so raising hand is a behavior. What about line up at the door? Can a dead man line up when you ask him to? No, a dead man can't go and line up, so lining up is a behavior. What about be quiet? Can a dead man be quiet? Yes, a dead man can be quiet. In fact, dead men are typically extremely quiet. So being quiet is not a behavior. What about non-compliance? Can a dead man be non-compliant? If you ask a dead man to do something, will he not do it? Yes, dead men are very good at being non-compliant. So being non-compliant is not a behavior. Some behaviors are easier to observe than others. For example, take walking. Is walking a behavior? First ask, is walking something an organism does? Is walking a verb? Or is it a mental state? Walking is a verb. It's something an organism does. Now ask, can a dead man walk? Of course, a dead man can't walk. Therefore, walking is very clearly a behavior. Without even asking these questions, though, we would probably all agree that walking is a behavior. Walking is an easily identified behavior because when someone is walking, we can watch them move their feet and their legs. As long as we have the ability to see, We can visually observe the behavior of walking, making walking a public behavior. It is usually relatively easy for an outside person to observe when someone is engaging in a public behavior. Other behaviors, though, are not as easy to observe. Take the example of thinking. Is thinking a behavior? First, we need to ask a couple questions. Is thinking something an organism does? Is thinking a verb? Or is it a mental state like anger or anxiety? This one can be tricky. Even though thinking happens in the brain, it is not a mental state. Thinking is something a person does. Thinking is a verb. The next question should be easier. Does thinking pass the dead man's test? Can dead men think? Since dead men can't think, thinking is a behavior. These types of behaviors are called private behaviors. Typically, the only person who knows when a private behavior is occurring is the person who is engaging in the behavior. Other examples of private behaviors are listening and silent reading. While we can observe whether or not a person has their eyes open and directed toward a book, we cannot really know that they are reading unless they say the words out loud as they are going along. Since private behaviors are so difficult for an outside person to observe, and since systematic observation is our main tool for measuring behaviors, we will focus the rest of these trainings on public behaviors. Through this lesson, you have been introduced to the field of applied behavior analysis. You have been shown how behavior analysts define behavior and have been provided with examples of both public and private behaviors. If you are still fuzzy on any of these concepts, please feel free to watch the video again. If you feel you are ready to move on, please watch the next video in the Tips for Teachers series.